Story 1. Our first story is called The Cabin, with someone still inside. I booked a small Airbnb cabin deep in the Smoky Mountains. It was supposed to be perfect, no neighbors, no traffic, just fresh air and quiet. I arrived late Friday evening. The sun had already set, and the forest was pitch black. The moment I stepped onto the porch, something felt off. The cabin door wasn't locked. I clearly remembered the note from the host. Keys under the mat. Door will be locked, but it wasn't. I pushed it open slowly. The lights were on, not all of them, just a single dim one in the kitchen. I called out, "Hello," no answer. Inside, everything looked normal. Except one thing, a mug of coffee sitting on the counter. Steam was still rising from it. It was warm. I tried to convince myself the cleaner must have just left and forgotten to lock up. I unpacked my things and turned on a movie to try and calm my nerves. Around midnight, I heard something from the attic. It wasn't the random creaking of an old house. It was footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. I froze. I didn't even know the cabin had an attic. I muted the TV and listened. The footsteps moved across the ceiling, toward the trapdoor I now noticed in the hallway. And then they stopped, right above it. My heart was pounding. I grabbed my car keys, my phone, and nothing else. Before I could even make it to the front door, I heard the trapdoor shift. A scraping sound, like someone was pushing it open from above. I didn't wait to check. I bolted outside, jumped into my car, and sped down the winding mountain road with my high beams shaking on the trees. The police checked the cabin the next morning. They found footprints in the thick dust of the attic floor, leading directly to the trapdoor. They also found fresh food wrappers shoved behind one of the support beams. Someone had been living up there, watching, listening. The officer told me the cabin had been broken into multiple times over the past few months. The owner never told their guests because they didn't want to hurt business. I never got my refund. But honestly, I don't care. I'm just glad I got out before the person in the attic decided I shouldn't. Story to this next story is called The Lake House That Never Sleeps. My girlfriend and I rented a lake house for a quiet weekend away from the city. The house was old, but charming, a little dusty, a little creaky, nothing too strange at first. But the first night, around 2 in the morning, we heard it, knocking, not on the front door, not on the walls, but on the windows. Like someone was tapping with a single finger. Tap, tap, tap. We grabbed a flashlight and checked outside. But there was no one there. The night was still. The next night, it happened again, but it was louder. This time, it was coming from multiple windows at once. Tap dash tap dash tap dash tap. It was moving, starting from the living room, then going down the hall toward the bedrooms. There was no way that was just the wind. We decided we had to leave, but we couldn't. A storm had rolled in, and the long dirt driveway had turned into a river of thick mud. Our car was completely stuck. Back inside, the tapping changed. It wasn't random anymore. It was rhythmic, almost like someone was tapping out a deliberate pattern. Tap, 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 my girlfriend whispered. It's trying to communicate. I didn't want to admit it, but she was right. The tapping really did feel intentional. We stayed awake in the dark for the rest of the night, holding our breaths, just listening to it circle the house. Whatever it was, it never tried to break in. It just wanted us to know it was there. At sunrise, the tapping finally stopped. We managed to get the car towed later that morning and left as soon as we possibly could. When I returned the keys to the owner, I told him what had happened. He looked down at the counter for a long moment, sighed, and said, "You're not the first. The house sits where an old dock used to be. 2 kids drowned there back in the 70s. The locals say they still wander the shoreline at night, tapping on windows, looking for help, Whether that story was true or just something he told guests, I don't know. But I do know one thing. I still hear that rhythm sometimes. Tap, 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 tap. Especially when I'm trying to fall asleep. Story 3. Our final story tonight is the man in the woods who knew my name. A few years ago, my best friend and I took a weekend camping trip in northern Oregon. We picked a really remote area, no cell service, no other campers anywhere nearby. The first night was peaceful, the second night was different. Around 11 p.m., we heard someone walking around our tent, slow circles, crunch, crunch, crunch on the dry leaves. We stayed completely silent. We didn't even dare to unzip the tent to look. We just listened. After a full minute of this, the footsteps stopped. Right behind my head, just outside the thin fabric of the tent. Then we heard a man's voice whisper, "I know you're awake." My blood turned to ice. He said my name next, my actual first name. He said it softly, almost in a friendly tone, which somehow made it even more terrifying. We didn't move a muscle. We barely breathed. After a few seconds that felt like an eternity, the voice walked away, the footsteps fading back into the woods. We waited until the sun was fully up before we even thought about unzipping the tent. When we finally got out, we saw them. There were footprints everywhere circling our tent at least 10 times. We packed up faster than we ever have in our lives and practically ran back to the car. Miles away, at a small gas station, we ran into a sheriff's deputy, filling up his patrol car. We told him what happened. The deputy's friendly face changed immediately. He asked for the exact location of our campsite, and when we told him, he said, "You boys were lucky. We've been tracking a man in those woods for weeks. He's wanted for stalking hikers. He learns people's names from the tags on their gear and their car registrations. Just don't go back there." To this day, I still have nightmares about that voice whispering my name in the dark. Weekend getaways are supposed to be peaceful, but as these stories show, sometimes the scariest things happen when you're far from home, far from help, and completely alone. If you've ever had a creepy weekend trip or a terrifying getaway, share your story in the comments below. Thanks for watching and be careful out there. Story 4. This first story is called The Motel Room That Wasn't Empty. Last summer, I decided to take a solo weekend road trip through Nevada. The plan was simple: quiet desert driving, cheap motels, and some time to myself. It was all going great until my second night. I pulled into this small, roadside motel. You know, the kind the neon sign flickers on and off. And the guy at the front desk, like he hasn't slept in about 3 days. He gave me the key to room 108. The moment I walked in, something just felt off. The air was heavy and humid, almost like someone had just gotten out of a hot shower. But when I checked, the bathroom was bone dry. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the old air conditioning unit. Then I noticed something else. The alarm clock on the nightstand was unplugged. But I could hear it ticking, a faint, steady tick-tock. It was one of those old digital ones, so it shouldn't have made any noise at all, let alone while being unplugged. It seemed like someone had put batteries in it, which was weird, but I was exhausted from driving all day. I just wanted to sleep, so I didn't think much of it. I collapsed into bed and was out in minutes. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up. It wasn't a noise that woke me, but a feeling. Then I heard it, the sound of someone breathing. And it wasn't coming from outside, or from the room next door. It was inside my room, a slow, heavy, raspy breath. And it was coming from the closet. My heart started pounding in my chest. I sat up as slowly as I could, trying not to make a sound, holding my own breath. The closet door was cracked open, just a tiny sliver of blackness. I couldn't take my eyes off it. That little gap felt like a portal to something horrible. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone on the nightstand. I fumbled with the screen, my fingers shaking too much to unlock it at first. Finally, I managed to turn on the flashlight and aimed the beam directly at the closet door. The second the light hit the door, the breathing stopped, just silence. The sudden quiet was 1,000 times worse than the breathing had been. It was like whatever was in there knew I was awake, knew I was looking. It was waiting. I didn't move. I didn't get up to investigate. My survival instinct screamed at me not to open that door. I just sat there in the dark, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. Then, as quietly and slowly as I possibly could, I slipped out of bed, got dressed, grabbed my bag and my keys, and walked out of that room. I didn't dare look back. I went straight to the front desk. The same tired-looking receptionist was there. I told him what happened, the breathing, the closet, everything. He just stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed and spoke in a low voice. "You took room 108. He asked. I nodded. He shook his head slowly. "Nobody stays in that room if they can help it. A man overdosed in that closet about 2 years ago. Ever since, travelers say they can hear him at night. Breathing. Corporate won't let us close the room for good. I didn't even ask for a refund. I just took my keys, got in my car, and drove a few miles down the road before pulling over to sleep. Sometimes, I still wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, thinking I can hear that slow, heavy breathing. And I remember the way it stopped the instant I turned on the light. As if whatever was in that closet had been watching me sleep the whole time." Story 5. This next story is called The Airbnb Host Who Never Left. A couple of years ago, 2 of my friends and I decided to take a weekend hiking trip up in northern Michigan. We found this really cheap Airbnb listing for an entire home. The pictures looked fine, it was basic, but it seemed cozy enough for a weekend away. When we got there, the host, a man who looked to be in his 60s, was waiting at the door to greet us. Right away, his vibe was a little strange. He was overly friendly, almost aggressively so. He kept touching our shoulders when he talked, and he'd let out these loud laughs at things that weren't even funny. It was just a bit unsettling, but the really weird part came when he finished showing us around the downstairs area. He smiled this wide, unnerving smile and said, "Well, I'll be right upstairs if you need anything at all." We all just froze and looked at each other. My friend Sarah finally broke the silence. "Wait," she said. You're staying here, too?" His smile didn't falter. "Of course," he replied, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "I never leave my house." This was definitely not in the listing. An entire home rental usually means, the entire home is yours. But we were tired from the drive, the place was cheap, and we didn't want to make a scene. So we just kind of awkwardly brushed it off and tried to settle in. Later that night, around midnight, we were all in the living room, watching a movie. Suddenly, we heard footsteps directly above us. Not just regular walking, but fast, heavy steps, pacing back and forth. Then, we heard the unmistakable creak of a door opening at the top of the stairs that led down to our level. We muted the TV, listening. We assumed he was just going to the bathroom or getting a glass of water. But instead of footsteps, we heard a voice, a whisper, and he was whispering our names. He said my name, then Sarah's, then our other friend, Emily's. He repeated them, one after another, in this shaky, quiet voice, almost like he was practicing them, tasting them. We were completely frozen in place, staring at the top of the dark staircase. Then we heard a creak. He had stepped onto the first step. Then another creak, as he came down a second. A third, then he stopped, just silence. We could feel him standing there in the dark, just out of sight. After what felt like a full minute, we heard him turn and slowly walk back upstairs. We didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, we packed our bags as fast as we could, ready to get out of there. As I was grabbing my jacket from the guest room closet, I noticed something odd. There was a small, perfectly drilled hole in the back wall of the closet. I looked closer, and my blood ran cold. The hole pointed directly out into the living room, right where we had been sitting the night before. We left immediately and reported him to Airbnb support. They were actually very responsive and told us they'd remove the listing within 24 hours while they investigated. About 2 weeks later, we saw a local news article online. It was about our host. It turned out he'd been reported multiple times by other guests for spying on them and even entering their rooms while they slept. When the police searched his house, they found dozens of secret recordings in his attic. I still have no idea what he was planning that night, or why he was whispering our names on the stairs. But I am so thankful we left when we did. Story 6. This final story is called The Forest Road That Loops Back. For a weekend getaway, my girlfriend and I rented a cabin deep in the woods of northern Washington. To get there, the GPS directed us off the main highway and onto this long, unpaved forest road. There were no streetlights, no houses, nothing but miles and miles of dense trees on either side. About 20 minutes into the drive, the GPS suddenly lost its signal. It wasn't a huge deal. The instructions had said to just keep going straight until we reached the cabin. So that's what we did, but after another few minutes, my girlfriend pointed out the window. "Hey," she said, "didn't we just pass that tree? The one with the carving on it?" I looked over and she was right. It was a huge, old-growth pine with a heart and 2 initials carved into the trunk. I distinctly remembered seeing it a few minutes earlier. We thought it was strange, but figured maybe there were 2 similar trees. We kept driving straight, and a few minutes later, we saw it again. The exact same tree, the exact same carving. Now we were getting a little freaked out. We were certain we hadn't made any turns. The road was a straight line. How could we be looping? To test it, I took off my jacket and hung it on a low-hanging branch of a very distinct-looking bush. We drove for what felt like 10 minutes. And then we drove right past my jacket again. Panic started to set in. Real, gut-wrenching panic. It made no logical sense. We were trapped in a loop on a road that should have been straight. I decided to turn the car around completely and head back the way we came. But it didn't work. After about 5 minutes of driving in the opposite direction, we passed the carved tree again. It was impossible. The sun was starting to go down, and the forest was getting dark fast. The shadows between the trees looked deeper, more menacing. My girlfriend started crying, convinced we were trapped out here forever. And then we saw something. Up ahead, standing right in the middle of the narrow dirt road, was a figure. A person, a tall man, standing perfectly still, with his back to us. As our headlights hit him, he didn't flinch. He just slowly lifted his arm and pointed. He was pointing back down the road, the same direction we had just come from. My girlfriend screamed at me not to stop, to just go. I swerved the car onto the muddy shoulder, driving around him. As we passed, he slowly turned his head to look at our car. His face, it was completely blank. There was no expression. No anger, no curiosity, nothing. It didn't look human. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, and we sped away, not daring to look back. We drove for maybe 5 more minutes, our hearts pounding. And then, just like that, we were back on the paved main road. The loop was broken. We pulled over, and I looked in the rearview mirror. The entrance to the forest road wasn't there anymore. It was just a solid wall of trees. The next day, we found a park ranger station and told him what happened. He just nodded grimly. "Yeah, you hear stories," he said. "There are places in these woods where things aren't fixed. Roads change, paths disappear. And if you ever see someone standing in the middle of the path, don't follow their direction. They don't want you to leave." We never went back to that cabin. We never even tried.